to start by saying that we are very happy that ultimately Ukraine already has such kind of document. We should have had it much earlier, but the key thing is here.
Ти ставиш собі певні орієнтири і пріоритети. І от якраз я думаю, що очевидно для тих колег, які займаються питанням Криму, зокрема і в державних органах, та й не тільки, зрозуміло, що такий фундаментальний документ, як стратегія деокупації,
such a document like the integration document should have been a priority, and I think that we have set this as the goal for other colleagues to start that document, and we already have it. So what we need to say that this is a broad framework document, It is a political position paper or policy paper, public policy statement, as we can call it. And this is the document that is bringing together all key positions of the state of Ukraine regarding the questions that are emerging now and that are linked to temporary occupation of the Crimean Peninsula, and which could also be raised after the occupation will happen. So the availability of such document is key, making sure that all the authorities and all the agencies would follow the same line. So we already envisage that this document would become an underlying document. Legally, it was already enforced by the decree of the president, and we envisage that it's going to be a mandatory paper and key for all agencies that deal with the Crimea, of the central, regional level law enforcement bodies. So from now on, this is a very clear indication of what we're going to do and how we think about this. And we are now going to discuss the question of water, just for your information. The strategy gives a clear answer to that question, and that excludes any possible manipulation. So for us, the strategy is a framework, and that's very good that we have it. Based on this framework, we have to, the cabinet of ministers in particular, has to come out with the action plan, and we'll be glad to participate in this. So there has to be an action plan, a roadmap, so to speak, on how we're going to implement these provisions of the strategy. And this specific action plan, may consist of individual draft laws, other draft regulations, other initiatives or activities that are not related to legislation. So it's important that this action plan consists of quality activities for it to be prepared on time, and it should also be compliant with the strategy and expectations that public authorities and our citizens and our expert community holds, making sure that it would be relevant in terms of response to the challenges that we are facing. So in terms of the implementation of the strategy, it would be very important to put together this action plan, of course. And at the same time, we do think, and we are very grateful to the Security and Defense Council and all other agencies who are part of this process, and the President of Ukraine and the Office of the President, for this decision to finally having been made. That's a very important statement and a move on behalf of the state, very well positioned decision in as regards to the Autonomous Republic of the Crimea and the city of Sebastopol, and I think that's a very key benchmark event. So the approval of this strategy is not a sporadic or ad hoc activity. There's a whole chain of events that has led to this, and on the 26th of February, the president addressed the Crimean people. On the 26th of February, he has signed a very important policy paper regarding the activities aimed at the occupation and reintegration of the Crimea. So the president, less than in 1 month, issued 2 acts that are very strong policy and papers. And I think this is crucial for all of us and all our international partners, as we are moving towards the Crimean platform. And the questions that you have asked, and they are very relevant for that matter. Regarding your first, your question of water, we will not go in the sequence of your questions. The answer to, if we open the strategy, that's very simple. We will see there item 66. Ukraine ensures the conditions for organizing water supply to the Crimean Peninsula after the liberation of the temporary occupied territory and after the restoration of the constitutional order of Ukraine. I would like to remind you that this is the provision of the strategy, and that has been approved by the decree of the president, so it's a legally binding position. No any other position can be held by the government of Ukraine. As regards to any further work on the strategy, I don't want to abuse our timing. The rest of the work is the action plan. That's the key. And this action plan is to be implemented. I think that we are at a very good point. There's a very good statement. We were taught very good English. In English, there is a good to gain momentum. So to gain the right pace and dynamic and to hit the target on time. So and I think that as we're moving to August 23rd, we will be able to do a lot of interesting things. So in terms of transitional justice, well, it is in the strategy. It is mentioned there several times, and not only this term, but also indications on how this will be applied. Dear colleagues, could you switch off your mics, please? Thank you.
Тому ми сподіваємося.
Therefore, so there are indications to transitional justice, and there's no alternative to the transitional justice. On the same day, on the 24th of March, the president signed another decree on approving the national strategy on human rights, and also transitional justice was referred to there. So we think that transitional justice is already here. We are operating with it, and the concept of the transitional justice is something that we will enhance, mainstream, institutionalize, and operationalize. Regarding your question, first question on what happens to the citizens of the Russian Federation after deoccupation, I think this question has to be dealt with as part of the legal framework of Ukraine. Those people who illegally joined or gained access to the territory, they have to leave it. So why? Well, because according to the law of Ukraine, we will restore the constitutional order of Ukraine, and those who illegally penetrated this territory will have to leave it, and those who came there legally, they will have some time to leave that territory. The more difficult question is going to be what happens with those who have matrimony.
Що ті особи, які працювали на окупаційній адміністрації, ті особи вчиняли які тяжкі злочини, абсолютно повинні покинути територію, ніяк ті, хто незаконно на неї потрапив. Тож наразі це напевно.
Скажіть їм. So I think that's important, because then later on there will be questions that will be great to answer the question.
Thank you, Antonio. Let's hope that all that will happen and that it will be done easily, although there are some doubts about that much was mentioned about the international dimension and thinking about deoccupation and reintegration. We should keep it in mind, and I am pleased to give the floor to Ms. Emine Chaparova, First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. Ms. Emine, the Crimean platform, which is very much promoted by Ukraine, as of the moment, it is already mentioned in the strategy, and we have already noticed in the strategy that Ukraine should initiate the international process as to the revival of the territorial integrity and the international process aimed at this restoration. So what do you see, how do you see the role of Crimea in reintegration and implementation of the strategy? What should be the action plan, and how do you see the document? Thank you, Maria. Assalamu alaikum, dear friends. I'm happy to see many of my friends here on the Zoom screen, those with whom we have been cooperating on daily basis around the restoration and reintegration in Crimea. And I should say that we are very happy to see this document on the table. We had been waiting for it for 7 years. I won't repeat what Anton has said about the document, about its key emphasis, key items. Of course, the strategy requires further development of the action plan. Without the well-developed action plan, it will remain just a piece of paper. But of course, the need in such a strategy is not obvious for many our international partners. And for us, the strategy is the only possible form for communication of our public policy as to the issue, and the only way to promote our leadership position and the vision of the president of Ukraine as to the Crimean issues. During recent years, we had observed that the work on the Crimean issues was steered up, and it had to bring first fruit. So the strategy and Crimean platform development were closely interrelated. At this stage of the strategy preparation, our ministry submitted our vision to the drafters, and that our vision was integrated into the strategy. And actually, the Crimean strategy is a practical realization, practical implementation of our vision. So the Crimean strategy is a philosophy based on 3 pillars. So the strategic vision is first pillar. It is extremely important. Without strategic vision, you cannot consolidate positions of other stakeholders. For those who understand the procedure, this practice, it may be quite clear that, I mean, the strategy, the vision itself. For us, it is regular case, while for our international partners, the vision should be present to be drawn to it. And thus, the strategy would allow the synergy of international efforts, because when we say about deoccupation, the strategy defines the political and diplomatic framework. The strategy aimed at bringing Crimea back. And when we speak about strategic, please turn off your microphones. And now, when we think about the strategy of the Crimean platform, at this stage of development, we try to comprise both international and internal components to produce synergy. On August 23rd, we have scheduled the International Summit on Crimea. This is on the eve of the Ukrainian Independence Day, and we understand that without joint international effort, bringing Crimea back is impossible. Currently, all our efforts of the ministry are focused on organization of this summit. The position of the Russian Federation was expressed clearly, and I said that this is a threat to the authority of the Russian Federation, and currently they are working against this scheduled event. First of all, to draw attention back from this event and to prevent it from happening. While we understand that Crimean platform is a venue where we have to raise curtains and show, like through the window, what's going on in Crimea. Why this summit is so important. We would like to approve the Crimean Charter during this summit, because all of us understand that non-recognition policy is the point which may unite many countries. Many countries understand that the Russian Federation made a crime in 2014. We have to condemn this act. We have to condemn those crimes which are happening, which have been happening there from that moment. Not all the countries are ready to reflect this as a statement in the charter, and currently we're negotiating the language of the charter with other countries. Some countries believe that the sanctions should not be integrated into the charter, while for us it is important to reflect those statements which are so important for us. And from this point of view, the package of laws which were mentioned by Anton are very important for us. So when we speak about the role of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we are like a hands for application of the strategy. We have to form the network for international implementation of the strategy and the platform. We try to establish connections based on a special network of partner countries, and this is the point where we are happy to involve our experts, to involve our human rights activists, our civic activists as experts on the platform, and to develop that analytical documents which will be disseminated via the platform. Another aspect of our work is cooperation with the parliament to strengthen our response, the sanctions, the cancellation of the free economic area, which is of primarily importance because it should be eliminated. We had started our consultations with the MPs, and we clearly understand that the parliament can be the main way of communication with the other countries in the world, because in all the countries, the parliaments are decision-making bodies, and this can fulfill the gap which we had for many years, and we started to feel the feedback through this channel. Also, we have strengthened our work with the parliamentary assemblies of the Council of Europe and other international bodies, where we are able to present what's going on in Crimea today. And another important pillar of the Crimean platform is the experts network. We had signed the memoranda with some think tanks, with some analytical centers, and our role is to present the well-grounded opinion. On the other hand, to strengthen the experts' diplomacy with other capitals in Europe and in the world. Once again, I would like to emphasize that the facts that are well known to us and the things which are obvious to us about Crimea, they are not as obvious for other countries. We have to go beyond our borders. Thank you, Emine. The issues about Crimean platform passes over to Mr. Rifat Chubarov. What is your vision of the importance of the Crimean platform in deoccupation and reintegration of Crimea? And before you will answer this question, I would ask you another question about the strategy. Even before the publication of the strategy, you expressed some concerns and reservations about the document. So upon publication of the document, what are your key impressions? Some Crimean Tatar commentators and journalists expressed insufficiently satisfaction as to the strategy. What is your opinion? Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for invitation to this discussion. I had an opportunity to express my opinion about the issue, which was very similar to the question that you had asked me. So now I will speak very briefly. As the representatives of the Crimean Tatar people, where we're involved to the first draft of the strategy, some of our proposed statements were included, but the most key statements were not included. And now in more detail about what was not included. We cannot imagine the strategy which tries to resolve the issues of deoccupation and reintegration of Crimea and Sevastopol without clear statement about the future of the indigenous people in the territory. That's why submitting our draft statements to the strategy was so that the strategy formulates the policy and it has to set the objectives for integration. In the strategy, I quote, provision of national unity, stability, and unity of Ukrainian society and the state. I like very much this statement. Why we should not write protection and realization of the internal right of Crimean Tatar people for autonomy inside the Ukrainian national state. This is actually a more exact formulation of one of the objectives of Ukrainian state. If you recollect March 20 of 2014, when the Ukrainian parliament passed the decision about guarantees to Crimean Tatar people and guarantees the right of Crimean Tatar people for their territory and autonomy. I suggested to include this very statement, which was already passed by the parliament, into the strategy, and that was denied. When we look at the priority trends, priority sections of the strategy, which contain the objectives that should be, or tasks that should be fulfilled for the occupation. Why among those tasks we should not have the definition of the Crimean status, the status of Crimea as the Crimean Tatar autonomy. And one more item which was mentioned by Anton and other speakers, I mean very clear formulation of the public policies to those people who now colonize the Crimea. Because the strategy is a document designed for Ukrainian society, Ukrainian community first, then it is targeting the international community in explaining how we plan to deoccupy Crimea. And the international community should be able to understand clearly from the document what is the future of the territory itself and the future of the Crimean Tatar people, which was mentioned in the document of the European Parliament. This was paragraph 62 about the right of Crimean Tatar people for self-determination. And the third aspect of the strategy is to communicate things to the occupant state. There are millions of Russian citizens who by various means could be involved into those crimes that are related to the occupation of Crimea. That's why we provided our suggestion as to some norms which were denied. I tried to finish. So the messages that I mentioned, they are primarily important that the occupant country and the citizens of the occupant country should hear the clear message what we plan to do as to them. The international community should clearly understand what we want to do after the occupation of Crimea, why the Ukrainian society, including Ukrainian parliament, the government of Ukraine, and other government agencies should clearly understand their tasks. After my intervention and my feedback on the strategy, I've heard that, okay, let us include what you want at the stage of the strategy implementation and include this into the action plan. Of course, it would be easier to implement it, having in the strategy, but nevertheless, now we continue to work. Thank you, Mr. Chubarov. And now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Yulia Tishchenko, who is representative of the civil society, and she represents the National Platform Dialogue and Peace and Secure Reintegration. This organization deals more with the so-called Donetsk and Lugansk republics, but nevertheless, they also deal with the Crimea. Yulia, would you please comment on what we have heard from Mr. Chubarov, and how do you think whether this component, which is or is not sufficiently represented in the strategy, whether it could be included at the stage of implementation, and how this strategy, how smoothly the strategy could be implemented? And how this may be coordinated with the potential strategy of the reintegration of Donbass.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you very much for the question and for organizing this discussion. I think that the more we're going to reflect on the documents that have already been approved and enforced, the better is the action plan going to be, the action plan called to implement these strategic plans. So speaking about taking into account the rights of the Crimean Tatar people, the native people of the Crimea, and there has been a lot of criticism that the language, the current language of these documents is not sufficient, that the areas where the Crimean Tatars are referred to are the cultural heritage aspects, language policy. But if we take the document and read the outcomes of the strategy, the frame of the outcomes is quite broad. So it talks about the restoration of the rights of the Crimean Tatar people as native people of the Crimea, and that leaves a very broad potential opportunity, given that there is a consensus, a political will in place to then proceed with further steps along these lines. So the agenda regarding the approval of the legislative framework was well known, and even the framework legislation on the native people of the Ukraine was also part of that. And Rafat was referring to the resolution of 2014. And it's a kind of a anniversary of acknowledgement of the Crimean Tatars as the native people of Ukraine. And to a large degree, those draft laws that I have referred to should have been in place 6 or 7 years ago, but for different reasons, and I don't think this is the right time and the right place to voice this, but we're still on our way, and I do hope that these legislative steps will be made, and the political consensus between different branches of the government ultimately is going to be achieved. Generally speaking, in the text of this strategy, if we are attentive to the approach which is laid out there, and this is also to respond to your questions regarding possible synchronizations of some areas as regards to the reintegration of Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast and the situation in the temporary occupied territories of the eastern Ukraine. So I think these are the first strategic papers that converge the declaration of the political / diplomatic areas, the transitional justice, and thank you to Anton for including this reference into this document. And it also includes a broader framework which covers also many aspects of the safe reintegration. What it means is that amongst others, there is a certain activities of liberation of Ukraine, and these are events and activities dedicated to the development of the adjacent territories, the reforms in the security sector and other socioeconomic components which also correlate with the transitional justice. For example, the sustainability of the institutions, the reforms of the institutions. So these strategies are also referred to. So this is a framework document. So there may not necessarily, this may not necessarily include very specific things, but that also refers to, for example, social resiliency, social cohesion. So it also refers to the occupation and reintegration of the Crimea on the one hand. On the other hand, it is a much broader framework which also correlates to national level policies in terms of enhancing the social resilience of our society at large. And that pertains to the resolution of the conflict in the east, in Lugansk and Donetsk Oblast, and the resolution of this war in general, because we don't have 4 independent accidents. We have the Autonomous Republic of the Crimea, we have the Sebastopol, we have Donetsk Oblast, Lugansk Oblast. So it's hard to speak about standalone, separate policies for individually for Lugansk, individually for Donetsk, individually for Sebastopol or the Crimea. That document, to a large extent, declares and puts in place the foundations and the key areas, of course, with account of the Crimean specifics. And and once these documents are going to be elaborated and drafted, it is important that there would be spin-offs from here into the deoccupation of Donetsk and Lugansk with account of the Minsk Accord, etc., etc. I'm not going to go into those details, but to answer your first question, there is expectation and hope that these working documents, other papers, regulations and legislations that are going to be passed in order to achieve the outcomes, so to restore the rights of the Crimean Tatar people, that if the political will is in place, if there is a willingness to do this, to draft these documents, to communicate them, have them approved, there's all it takes for this process not to take 6 or 7 years. It can be done much faster. So the more discussions we have, the more reflections we make, the more we rationalize this process, things like deoccupation, transitional justice, and including and engaging different communities and organizations into this process, the more participatory this becomes. I think the more society will understand the complexity and the need of such processes related to the occupation and reintegration of the Crimea. And on top of this, based on the surveys, on the sociological surveys, we know that this is a very important topic for our society. And it's not new. It's quite an old discussion in terms of the attitude to Crimean Tatar national autonomy. I'm not going to talk about this different mayhem of terminologies, socio-cultural, cultural autonomy, but if you ask our citizens whether they support the development of the Crimean Tatar language, culture, their participation in the governance process, you will hear positive responses. But the question regarding Crimean Tatar autonomy in the Crimea is more controversial for that matter. So that simply explains that traditionally and for a long time, we don't understand the essence of the processes. We support them, but if we give it a label, if we give it a mark and legal term attached to this, then it triggers the lack of understanding in the society. So there's lots of things that need to be done. And thank you for this conversation. I would like to congratulate on us having this discussion today. We do need such platforms in order to pave the way to this action plan. Thank you, Yulia. Thank you for pointing out some of the provisions of the strategy as regards to transitional justice. I think they really make the strategy mature and with no populism, where we talk about inclusivity, inclusion, and including other citizens who are on the territory of Crimea and engaging them in this process. And that really gives a snapshot of how our work should be structured on the occupied territories. Igor Yeremenko, Deputy Minister on Reintegration of the Temporary Occupied Territory, is scheduled to join us a little bit later, but he's about to join. So if he's here, let me know. Please flag me if you're already here. While we are waiting for another Deputy Minister, I would like to pass on the floor to Yulia Kozdobina. She is the head of the Ukrainian Foundation of the Security Studies. And like Yulia Tyshenko and Olha Skripnik, they are part of the expert community of the Crimean platform that is being put together and that has been referred to recurrently today. What is your assessment of this strategy as it looks today in the context of the Crimean platform and beyond? Thank you for the invitation into this discussion. First of all, I would like to welcome the approval of this document. We have been discussing this for quite a long time, and we can now transition from complaining of not having one towards a discussion on how it should be implemented, its priorities, and what should be the next steps on the way of implementation. And my first feedback was a bit of a puzzlement, because if you look at the strategy, it does not look as a strategic plan whatsoever. It just looks like a selection of items which may not have a lot of clarity in terms of the sequence of the implementation. Mr. Krenevich explained, although that this is a positive document, it just shows our vision. But when the time comes to the implementation of this paper, then there will be an action plan drafted to support it. And I think you do know that I have the experience of working with a strategic document that was passed in December 2018, Information Reintegration Strategy of the Crimea, which until today, unfortunately, remains without any action plan. As far as I know, there's the third version of this plan somewhere pending in the corridors of our government, and I do hope that ultimately it will be enacted and approved. But that simply gives us an example that may not turn out to be as simple as we think. That when we're talking about the action plan and its implementation, we always remember that previous plan has taken us quite some time. But talking about strategic approaches to the implementation of the strategy, one thing that we have done when we were elaborating our strategy, which I think was very important, is that we have sorted things out. What are the stages of implementation of this strategy? And I'm referring to the information strategy, information reintegration. At that time, we were talking about formulating the vision, things that need to be done prior to communicating anything, research, monitoring, things that are happening on the occupied territories, events that are taking place on the international platforms, international organizations. Then this has our policy has to be informed based on this, and then reformatting that information and communicating this to specific audiences and groups. So speaking about the strategy that was approved today, it is very important to have the same very approach. So when we are talking about reintegration and deoccupation, so the first phase would be the preparatory stage, where Ukraine would have to formulate its policy, or well, its position for that matter. It has already been formed, but the policy has to include our approach to the already liberated territories, and the system of monitoring has to be in place, because any policy which is built by the government has to be based on the real understanding of the situation as it is, and that's another prerequisite that should be in place. Then the next stage, there's when we're talking about liberation and preparation for the liberation activities, and that's what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is now doing. This is about the Crimean platform consolidating international efforts to support Ukraine in its efforts to liberate the Crimea. Then the next stage would be the liberation itself, and we may not know how exactly this will take place, but we understand that liberating the Crimea and deoccupying Crimea means winning the war against Russia, because both the Crimea and the Donbass are currently under the occupation of Russian Federation, and unfortunately, Russian Federation is nowadays stronger than we are, and that's a challenge not only to Ukraine, that creates a lot of challenges to many other countries, meaning interfering into US elections or efforts to instigate quarrels between EU members and use the Crimea to then spin off into Syria, and many other things that we agree that we're not going to talk about today. But Russia is a big challenge, and it's not only a Ukrainian challenge. It's a regional challenge, at least. And to say that we will so easily deoccupy the Crimea is not something we can say just like that. So we need to talk about the preparatory phase, and then from then on there will be liberation, and then depending on how liberation will go, the last stage is going to be reintegration. So, and I think that it's very important, first of all, to see how this will be phased out, because the strategy is a document that allows us to take a big pie of objective and cut it into pieces. And so people have to agree how each one of them has to take a piece, and then we have to understand we're building this together, and this has to be coherent. It's important to see the one way, to see the phases, who is at which stage, who's doing what, and understanding what activity should go first, what should go next. And so the monitoring should be done prior to the policy, and policy should be formulated prior to the communication. If we don't have the policy in place, there's nothing to communicate whatsoever, and many other things. So when we are going to put together the plan, we need to take this into account, and we need to think about those things from that point of view. So speaking about the cooperation between the civil societies and the state in the framework of the Crimean platform, which is targeting international audiences, I think that network can be not only targeted at international audiences. We can have a good synergy if we agree between ourselves who's doing what, how we can strengthen each other. That expert community can be very fruitful also on the national level. supporting government agencies in certain ways, because we understand that the capacity of the government is not as strong as we want it to be. So we can support them by some sort of research, expert assessments, monitoring, criticism if we disagree with something. But at any rate, we understand that we are arm's length on the one hand. On the other hand, we were independent. On the other hand, we have the common goal of liberating the Crimea, the Donbass, and reinstating our territorial integrity. So we need to consolidate on that basis, and that strategy could become one of those instruments. And the only question that I have based on this is that we have talked about how this strategy correlates to transitional justice, and I have no doubt that the question of the liberation of the Crimea is the national security issue, and in the process of the drafting of the plan, we need to also look at the national security strategy, because reinstating territorial integrity is referred to there at length. So that we need to keep that in mind. Thank you. That's what.
Thank you, Yulia. Further on, we would like to discuss very important things related to the human rights protection. We have two colleagues who will present their point of view on the item. But before doing that, and before giving the floor to Olga Skripnik and Olga Kurishka, I would like to give a couple of minutes to the First Deputy Minister on Reintegration. And I also would like to draw your attention to the comment in our chart. There are many strategies which are approved as to the occupied territories and the occupation, and they are not being implemented. So this is now my question to Anton and Emine. Do you see sufficient political will which will allow to implement the strategy, or we may expect for the similar unsuccessful implementation of this one more strategy? Thank you for this question to Sergei, who asked this question. We also believe that the strategy on the occupation of Crimea is a good document, and we are very grateful to the ministries involved. I'm not the representative of the executive bodies, and I believe that Article 5 is very good, very fundamental. What is the article? The article says that Ukraine does not recognize the so-called citizenship, that it does not recognize the temporary occupation of the Crimean peninsula, that it takes a responsibility for maintenance of relations, that the reparation and of damages should be put on Russian Federation. I should speak on behalf of my body that we monitor what's going on in the occupied territories, and within our powers we try to do as much as we can. But of course, I believe that the action plan should be approved. As to your question, whether this could be a success story, whether it has chances to become a success story, yes, it has a big chances to become. success story today. Emine, I will try to speak as openly as possible and answer Sergei as honestly as possible. In my previous capacity in the foreign in the Ministry of Information, which was established in an attempt to respond to the and in this context, I should say that we keep this experience in mind when we bring in important aspects to the attention of international community about the occupation of Crimea in February 2014. I believe that one of the problems of our public administration today is rooted in the lack of sustainability and institutional sustainability, internal institutional sustainability. So I believe that the agencies should have their institutional memory and activated in course of their work, and the lack of that institutional memory harmfully influences that institutional sustainability. For example, the Ministry of Information policy, when it started to implement the strategy aimed against Russian disinformation, it was a good experience. And today we clearly understand that neither strategy, neither document could be a panacea against the harmful processes. And when you draft any comprehensive document, as comprehensive as the strategy, you should involve as many stakeholders, not only governmental institutions, but the society and as broad stakeholders as possible, to unite them around the strategy. For all of us, as Yulia mentioned, this is a test on our maturity, a test on our preparedness to work for the sake of our objectives. I'm very grateful to you. I understand that the focus of attention for you and for many international organizations now will be on the action plan. And in some 10 minutes, we will have First Deputy Minister on reintegration with us. And in the meanwhile, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Olga Skripnik. She's head of the Crimean Human Rights Group. She is part of the expert network of the Crimean platform. So besides my question about your general perception of the strategy and your opinion, I would like to ask more specific question about the decolonization, about the feedback and response on the statement from the Russian Federation. How do you think whether this item can become more or less complicated upon liberation of Crimea? Thank you, dear colleagues. I understand that the discussions around the strategy have stirred up the issue of Crimea and brought the Crimea into the center of narrative today. I understand that we may feel unhappy about some items in the strategy, maybe some statements made in it, but nevertheless, now we had received the response of the Russian Federation on the publication of this strategy, and now we had received the clear statement about Russia in Ukrainian legislation that this is the aggressive state and how we should take it. When we look at the humanitarian dimension, I believe that this is the main focus of this strategy, and for me, as for a human rights activist, this humanitarian dimension is more important even than the territory, because for myself, I see people behind the territory. And the human rights aspects of the strategy are very important for me. It is important also for me that the strategy prohibits any blackouts, any cuttings of the territory from services. That is, the harm for people is prevented. And the strategy responds to my concern about the protection of human rights. The strategy clearly points out to the cooperation with human rights organizations. Of course, unless we have the action plan ready, it is difficult to imagine how all that steps would be implemented. When the action plan is on the table, then we will be able to understand more how we can go forward. By the way, many strategies, many issues raised in the strategies are related to the national level. For example, the trust to justice, the trust in society, the other aspects of social peace. The latest protest near the presidential office clearly had demonstrated that you cannot speak about Crimea and processes which you would like to implement there, separating that from the all Ukrainian issues. This is about social responsibility, and without taking that responsibility, it won't be possible to implement many aspects of the strategy. As to the reintegration, for me, this is closely connected with demilitarization. I have a feeling that the strategy lacks clear understanding how this could be done, how decolonization and demilitarization of the region should be done when the Crimea is deoccupied. All these aspects are insufficiently reflected in the strategy. These are those items which should be in more details reflected in action plan. And the strategy of substituting population in Crimea, in changing the Crimean population, this is the general strategy of Russian Federation, which will make further referenda impossible in Crimea. So this is what we have to discuss together with our international partners, and perhaps we will be able to come to some joint strategy as to deoccupation and decolonization. In my opinion, as of today, the sanctions regime are one of the most efficient tools, and we should look at them in the context of decolonization. And the Ukrainian dimension of the process is a separate discussion. We have to produce our own strategy of deoccupation and decolonization. I also believe that deoccupation and reintegration, seen as interrelated processes, is a very positive aspect of our approach. We have to protect people and bring them back to Ukraine. Thank you, Olga. Thank you for emphasizing the sanctions, and I would like to remind you what Emine said, that one of the cornerstones around which discussions were held about the Crimean Charter, this was that very issue. Now we have Mr. Igor Yaremenko, First Deputy Minister on reintegration of temporary occupied territories with us. Mr. Yaremenko, I understand that the ministry which you represent is the key ministry in the process of reintegration. So my questions to you are as follows. How do you assess the strategy? How do you see the further contribution of your ministry in the action plan development, and how do you see the further implementation of this potential action plan, because there is always a threat that the plan won't be implemented? And how do you see the coordination between the Crimean strategy and the transition period, the draft law transition period? And one more question about statement by Alexei Reznikov that at the moment of deoccupation, the Russian citizens or the residents of Russian Federation would be asked to leave the peninsula. Whether this is related somehow to decolonization in your vision. And the question which we received in our chat about inclusiveness, about social dialogue, about transition justice, who has to facilitate this dialogue, who has to coordinate all this work? And I encourage you to ask questions in chat. Thank you, Maria. I have to apologize for inability to connect from the very beginning of the event. As for my assessment of the strategy, I would like to emphasize the following issues. This is almost the first comprehensive document about deoccupation and reintegration of the Crimean Peninsula. And this aspect, it is very important because for many years we had no a strategy as to this issue, while Russian Federation kept saying that the issue of Crimea is resolved. We understand that the issue of Crimea is not resolved and it should remain on the agenda, and the Crimean Peninsula has to be deoccupied and reintegrated to Ukraine. Then the next, as what is related to the action plan development. We had received a special assignment for the Prime Minister to develop such an action plan. And by June 1st, our ministry, with cooperation with all the governmental stakeholders, has to submit the action plan. We had started our work, and the bigger part of the strategy deals with the responsibilities of our ministry, but we reasonably expect that other ministries will be able to contribute much. As for the synchronization of the Crimean strategy with the draft law on transition period, I believe that they should be seen as the complementary documents. Our draft law has, to answer the question, what will happen immediately upon the deoccupation, and how the reintegration will take place. This draft law is about reintegration of all the deoccupied territories, and this is actually the signal both to the Russian Federation and to the international community that the issue of Crimea is not resolved. It has to be resolved in the framework of international law. The Crimean platform is a tool for us. It would allow us to coordinate our actions with the international partners and to wait until Russian Federation will be ready to start the dialogue about the occupation. We should establish the platform well in advance, before the Russian Federation would decide that they are ready to start discussions about the occupation. And moreover, the Crimean platform is a tool to encourage, so to say, Russian Federation to the discussions about Crimea. There are another inclusive aspects which we had launched today at the governmental meeting. We discussed the role of support of Crimean Tatar language development in general reintegration of Crimea. As for the decolonization, for me, it's not so easy to comment on that because I'm not a press secretary of the Vice Prime Minister, but my vision of this logic is as follows, that any person which finds itself on the territory of any other state and has no legal grounds for this may expect that the law might be applied to this person. Actually, we suggested nothing new. What to do with the person who had breached the law. So for me, this is the logic. whether this issue is resolved or not. In the current draft, we have discussions. We faced absolutely opposite visions of how this should happen, and now there is a dialogue between the civil society and the state, and we try to find some well-balanced approach. And your last question was about the facilitator of the social dialogue. It seems to me that as of today, we have many facilitators, and that's even good for the process. We have governmental authorities, governmental agencies who try to facilitate the internal dialogue between the state and the society.
And I can say that this draft law basically is the invitation of our ministry and the government for this kind of dialogue. And similarly, we have very good facilitators in civil society who push government authorities in a good sense to be more proactive. And that is an absolutely a normal instrument of interaction between the government and civil society. So I wouldn't single out anyone in particular, but I would rather focus on agreeing regarding details, and all those who are willing to discuss need to be engaged. Thank you, Igor. Just one clarification. Can also non-government organizations submit their proposal to the action plan? And if so, then what would be the format for that? Well, I would say that I'm not going to be against. I do support NGOs expressing their opinion and making their voice heard. It's not that we're going to include all 100% of those proposals. I don't know what those proposals are and what are they going to be, but we are hearing NGOs, we are inviting them, and we're inviting you, so you have our contact. Gladly hear from you about your vision on how this strategy is being implemented. So of course you're welcome. Thank you again. I would like to pass on the floor now to the final speaker, or last but not least, Olga Grishka, but we will probably take 5 more minutes time. There's another speaker that I would like to give the floor to. I'm not sure we will hear the answer to this question, but Katerina Yeresko, she represents Crime journalist.
Вирішити перезвонити теж поки, щоб не переписуватись. Слухай, по інфографіці, що ми робимо? Маєте на увазі ось цю про згоду на опрацюванні поширення? Особливо немає, я не міг знайти. Хорошо.
NGOs was in the context of the human rights aspect. Before the text was we have the text, but this strategy already has some provisions which are being implemented now, and whether it would have to design new mechanisms of human rights protection for the citizens of the temporary occupied territories. I would divide these provisions.
Ні, ти розумів. Я пропоную, що я йому надсилаю, хай помучається, базову версію зробить, а тоді ми вже будемо фекати, тут вже пустіше. Тільки єдине, що як мені йому сказати, він в курсі, не в курсі, старатимось це в рамках проєкту відродження. Ну, я розумію. Ну, я з ним так в робочому порядку через емейл, він там далі з людьми працює. І ще хотів уточнити, оця по ОСББ теж хороша штука. Ми не чекаємо, поки вийде стаття, одразу паралельно йому надсилаємо, йому то до фонаря такий текст є, тому що він на інфографіку може робити.
cross-border
Хорошо,
points.
поступово.
It's important that this strategy also
Хорошо.
reflects and
Да, домовились.
in terms of sanctions, scripting was speaking earlier, it's important that this policy is already reflected there, and the question of applying sanctions to against the people who have been part and parcel of the violations on the territory of Crimea is key. Also, we have heard the statements regarding the property and land rights. Since the presidential decree of Russian Federation is now being enforced regarding the property status of the land in the Crimea, because now that's a borderland and the foreigners are not allowed to be proprietors. So that the strategy becomes very important because that also takes care of these questions. And in terms of the further steps, and for me, the online services, our organization, in cooperation with many other of those who are present here, with the representatives of the CSOs, have been working at length to develop such mechanisms in order to provide these services online. And here we can see this possibility being implemented. It means that we are on the right way. The damage registry, that's also another important step that should have been put in place a long time ago, and it's good that we will have it now. And also the evidence database for the crimes that are being committed on the territory of the Crimea, on the one hand, is being dealt with, and then that also provides the evidence and for the claims that are submitted on behalf of Ukraine. That gives us an opportunity to fixate and record and keep track of all the violations that are happening on the territory of the Crimea. Another important topic for our organization is kidnapping, forced kidnapping, or disappearance, for that matter. There was an information of the UN Monitoring Commission when they referred to these cases in the Crimea, so starting from the occupation. Our organization keep track of this. There are 44 such disappearances on the territory of Crimea, and maybe that aspect will be reflected in terms of what Ukraine needs to do. I think we also lack to focus on the citizens of the temporarily occupied Crimea, because there are certain aspects regarding education, administrative services, but in the guiding principles, there is no focus on the citizens of the Crimea. There's only IDPs who were mentioned there. And I think that would be extremely crucial to have them there. And also the question of the compensation for the damage as a result of the occupation, both in the draft law on the transitional justice and in this strategy. The reimbursement is the duty of Russian Federation only. In our comments for the traditional justice draft law, we thought that that's not a very good idea, given the existing decisions of the international institutions, that the compensation for this damage cannot be bared only by one party. That's another opportunity, I think, to think on how Ukraine could come up with the mechanisms of such reimbursements as well. In terms of other things that I wanted to add as regards to decolonization, and which I think that we are looking at this from the context of the civil society. So everything is clear in terms of military and for the civil population, there cannot be a uniform approach. We are bound by the international law. For example, the massive displacement of foreigners is prohibited. On the other hand, the activities that are done by Russian Federation and moving and displacing people into Crimea and from the Crimea is a military crime. But I have seen in the strategy that the foundation has already been laid. There's a general frame which says that Ukraine guarantees the rights and freedoms of the foreigners who are illegally located and situated on the from the occupied territories. But such citizens and persons without citizenship who would be illegally on the territory of the Crimea are very few. Most of them are illegals. They come from the territory of Russian Federation and not from the territory controlled by Ukraine. And inside our team, internally, we have asked several questions, and I think that the answers to this question would also become the answers to the question of what do we do with these people. First of all, holding them liable for the illegal border crossing. This is administrative and criminal strategy, and strategy already does refer to this. The people who illegally cross the border will be held administratively liable. And there are also questions that are linked closely to their purchasing the property within these 7 years, because even prior to the decree of the President of Russia, there have been various legal actions and transactions regarding the property. So how this property will be given back to their legal owners who got hold of this property is a question. Then the question of reimbursement of damages to the legal owners and Russian Federation citizens or other foreigners who resided in Ukraine, how can they legally stay there? Occupation is a question, because, and I'm emphasizing the civil population, because the majority of the people, they do not know the norms and provisions of the international law and other specificities. So they will think that they are legal owners of that property, and they were in Crimea on the legal basis. So there's another question of the position of the European Human Rights Court, because there are certain aspects that need to be taken into account. And another important question, and there is no question to the response to this, but we need to thank you for that question. I have already, my opinion is that we don't have one clear answer to the question how, but I think that it has to come out as a result of our dialogue and our exchange of opinions. Sorry for holding you back, but I would like to give the floor to Katerina Eresko. Last but not least, 2 or 3 minutes, please. The floor is yours. Hello, dear colleagues. I'm very happy to take part in this expert level discussion of on behalf of our team. We represent CSO community, and I think that our attitude to the approval adoption of the strategy was very positive. It's a very timely step, very timely act, which is built on the humanistic approach. Of course, we can be nothing but positively surprised by this. So now our task is making sure for this strategy to become enforceable from the point of view of the properly sequenced steps. It has come to be that our journalist investigation group is dealing with the issue of illegal vessel servicing in the Crimean ports. We know different facts that are happening there, but based on that question that you raised, I can maybe refer to you to a more general question. So the first thing I wanted to say is that as part of the occupation, very important is the operationalization of the Crimean platform. So, and what we are expecting is not just to have general meetings and putting together joint positions, but what we would like to see, and we think this is very promising, we want to strengthen the sanctions mechanism and sanction-based policy through the communication on the Crimean platform. We need additional channels of communication. We need speedy channels of interaction with foreign countries, and we can see this from the topic of that we are processing. So far, this is a more of an insurgency type of work, but we want to have a very professional government policy in this area to be put in place. And another question pertains to the reintegration of the Crimea. And in order to have a successful reintegration, our country will find this very crucial to see Crimean ports being launched. That case is going to be much more successful than what the occupying state is doing when they invest in construction projects. Crimean ports are losing their image because they are now dilapidated. Materially, their infrastructure is very poor, and that's going to be a challenge for our state on how to launch those ports and to show to the population, to the people, that these important strategic enterprises are operational again, are commissioned again. So in the strategy, there is a reference to the registries, to the property registries. What we would like to point out that it is absolutely essential to monitor the state of those companies and enterprises that operate in the Crimea, monitor their proprietary status, and stand ready to take certain steps for the reintegration of these companies into industrial sector of Ukraine. So far, what we see is the government is not really addressing this, and I think that really poses quite a big of an issue. Thank you. Thank you, Katerina. I think it's important to talk about reintegration in a very specific terms, in terms of the ports, or based on those examples, and I think that brings the time when we will be able to do this. So, dear colleagues, we will have to adjourn. We have exceeded our time of the meeting, so I'm very grateful for those who stayed until the very end, and I'm very grateful to the fellow colleagues who took part. Anton in particular, thank you for being with us from A to Z, and I think that was also very useful and interesting. I would like to emphasize, and would like to also invite colleagues from the non-government sector to submit your proposals and comments to the Ministry of Reintegration. By the 1st of June, we are supposed to have the action plan for the strategy implementation. I think that's a very good sign of this strategy, hopefully, and we'll do our best to be implemented as soon as possible. Thank you very much again. Thank you to House of Thank you to the Presidential Office and their representative in the Crimea and USAID for supporting our event. Thank you very much. We will send our video recording in English and in Ukrainian.
Thank you for joining us today, and we will send you out the video recording of today's conversation in both Ukrainian and English. Thank you so much. Дякуємо і до наступних зустрічей.
Thank you very much, and see you during our next discussion. Goodbye.